the DOJ and governmental bodies around the world, like the EU, thinks they can decide to legislate what type of ports your phone decides to use and things of that nature. If they try to legislate all of these things like AI legislation and the type of browsers that you want to use legislation, and Google integration legislation, it's going to slow the technological progress even more if you have all these copious amounts of laws and regulations that you have to abide by or within the technological space. So hope you guys can see this on the screen. But technological innovation, even without these burdens, might be coming to an end. Like let's talk about your cell phone here. Um, right, cell phones and computers have exploded in popularity year over year. Like more people have smartphones than ever before, and what is considered a dumb phone now would probably be considered a smartphone way back in 2007. Smartphones and computers, of course, these home computers have been around since like the late 70s and early 80s, and smartphones came in the early 90s, but they didn't really gain popularity until the 2000s. But innovation in the smartphone sector might be dead. Like I always like to state, the iPhone 6s is like one of the pinnacle, key important iPhones, of course, in terms of popularity. Um, and when we get into the mid 2000s, apps are the big new thing. Just like computer software was the big thing in the 80s and the 90s for the computers, and this was initially a good thing. It did take down BlackBerry, unfortunately for them, and Windows phones, and now we're at Android and iOS, right? But apps are the new thing. If you didn't have apps, you didn't innovate fast enough, and of course, you didn't have a touchscreen which people really liked, then your phone company and your phone's entire OS would be eliminated. So in this period of time, of course, we saw BlackBerry OS, Symbian OS, and Windows Phone all go away, as well as flip phones and dumb phones also go away, and now we have smartphones, right? And then the phone companies have to decide what they're going to do now, right? You have enough apps, probably for what you need, and things of that nature. But remember, back then in like 2008, 2009, once you get the basics were not good. The basics were not that good. Browsers, like an increase in browser performance, as we'll see in the video, now over time, back then, back in the 2008, 2010, right? If you've seen a few videos, you talk about browser performance. That was a very important thing. Also, and maybe the DOJ wants to listen to this, but you couldn't really change the browser that was built in on your phone. It was just set there. Or on my phone now, you have like hundreds of browsers that you can choose from. Now, of course, only a few of them are actually good, but you just have hundreds of browsers that you can choose from if you want to, as well as search engines. But back then, the browser was built in to change it. So when you had got it, the browser performance did improve. It did get better, and of course, messaging applications, they also did get better. Calling, calling applications had to go from pretty decent because we had the keypad, and then they probably got bad because they touching. But once you finally got that down, that's good. You have now you have your calling, your messaging, your browser, and your few utilities. So like a notes application, your camera application, your gallery application. Once you get all that down, you're not going to need a third party application for that. Once you get all that down, and once you get everything set, what is their next innovate? Well, there's not much that the phone companies themselves can do, but you can have these third-party apps. And of course, there weren't that many apps back then, so you'd see more apps coming over and over and over at the time. But how the phone companies were supposed to innovate is specs. You can see massive year over year, or maybe 2 year over year improvements over time. Like if you do a jump from, say, the Samsung Galaxy S1 to the Samsung Galaxy S3 and S4, the camera performance would be improved. Of course, the battery in the S1 was like 1,500 milliamp hours. So when you switch over to, say, a Galaxy S7 Edge, in only a span of a few years, you have an expanded screen, you have a curved edge screen, you have a 2.5 time, no, yeah, about 2.5 to 2.1 times bigger battery. These are huge specs from an upgrade perspective, right? And of course, these features that are included, people would upgrade and buy their phones for these brand new niche features like fingerprint scanning. Hey guys, look, the operating system Android 4.4. I was really excited for this when Android 4.4 came out, but when Android 5 particularly moved it from my tablet, face recognition technology came to the device. Optical zoom cameras, it was really big back in 2018, 2019 with the Samsung Galaxy S8, Note 8 and S9 Plus series of devices, getting optical zoom cameras, the whole edge-to-edge display. Of course, they got USB-C, right? But now, specs, they don't really mean anything as much, right? These year-over-year upgrades, they had something that was tangible. The camera performance got better, or even doubled as you went from one camera to two cameras to three cameras, right? But now specs have gotten so good, but the application development hasn't kept up, which means innovation might be dying because there's no reason that you need to have more specs, right? 5,000 milliamp hours has been the decided choice for batteries, at least in the Android world, on S24 Ultra, and from every Ultra S20 to the S24 Ultra now has had a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and it's been pretty decent across the board. Now, maybe for some units like mine, maybe the battery won't be as good. And the camera performance, right? It's been good. You can see some improvements in terms of zoom and things of that nature if you're like professional or videography or things like that. But most people, because of the lack of an app situation, are using Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, multiple photo sharing applications, which then compress them, which means essentially, unless you're taking Zoom pictures or video, and people don't know how to take good videos anymore, like the stabilization is really bad, the vertical video quality is really bad. So unless you're using, I guess, YouTube, but for most social media platforms, which YouTube is not, but for other social media platforms like Instagram and Pinterest, right, it's going to compress it, which means essentially that unless you're performing some type of OSINT or like surveillance or detective work on the pictures, you're not going to notice the difference between, say, an iPhone 6S or an iPhone 13 or an iPhone 16 or a Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Of course, this is exempting the zoomed in images. This is just like taking one-on-one cropped images, especially since most of those things are going to, of course, get compressed and they're going to go through filters. So it doesn't really matter what kind of camera you have on there, as long as it's not really bad, like the kitty zoom camera, right? And of course, you cannot just upgrade just for the specs. Of course, cell phones are going to stay around. Like laptops have been around since the 80s, and they have literally not changed in terms of form factor or in terms of in terms of form factor. Literally, it's like a screen and a keyboard, right? Now, how you configure the keyboard has basically been the same, and the screen has gotten so that when the first laptop came out, it was more bezel than screen. Now it's more screen than bezel, and of course, you did some improvements here, like you have a touch screen. Maybe you can do some improvements like, oh, this has a better touchpad, has a better keyboard as well. But when you look at like MacBooks and things of that nature, like I said, most kids have a MacBook. In some article, right? In one of like the hot take articles. Like when you look at the work that they're doing on the MacBooks, it's that computers, right? This is also the same thing that's for the sad thing that's happening in innovation in the computer space, is that computers are basically being used as big screen, phones. Like, some people are like, oh, I can't, I'll do this at home when I get onto my computer, and I'll use the link, and I want to use my browser to see the big screen or anything like that. But Microsoft and the Windows operating system was created long before the World Wide Web, internet, publicly accessible internet was really a thing. Like it was created at a time when the internet was basically a command line interface. Not really command line, but like just text, not really graphics. So browsers didn't really exist at a time of that nature. So when people are using these links on like Windows and things of that nature, Mac OS, Chrome OS doesn't really count because Chrome OS is built from the ground up around a web browser. Which, how would a ruling affect Chrome OS? Hey guys, this is the Chromebook by Google, but you guys, you can choose what browser you want. It doesn't seem fair, but whatever. Anyway, back to the computers, right? What they're basically doing is just using a website, and they want the big screen, which Windows wasn't just designed just to be hey guys, browser with the screen attached to it, a big screen attached. So that's basically what a Chromebook is for. Um, but it seems that people have gotten content with that. But Microsoft, they're gonna be fine with that, right? People still are going to pay hundreds of dollars for computers that literally just display information or show a browser, even though like your phone can do it, just that you don't think the screen's big enough, which I don't really. Of course, if you have like a good phone, that has a stylus, which you can have a Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra or any of the older Ultras, which would be cheaper at least on eBay. Or you guys can get the Motorola Stylo and Stylo 5G series, which also has a stylus. It looks like a piece of foil, but it does have a stylus. I played with it before. Um, and you can use the web that way. Like with large budget cell phones or 6.6, 6.7 inches, um, of screen real estate. And they're even bigger to hold because the bezels, of course, on flagship smartphones like Samsung Galaxy's S series of phones, is are smaller than the bezels over on the budget and mid range series of devices. So honestly, it doesn't really make sense that people are just using computers to display information, especially like the CrowdStrike outage. We learned that all those computers that were showing flight information or even terminals, or that just kind of like showed ads and maybe those like mall maps, which I think could probably be done on a power efficient SoC specialized operating system, were often used by Windows machines, right? It seems like that most people don't really use Windows for its intended purpose. But the problem is, I think it's with search. App discovery over on Android is awful. It's really awful. Like, um, you'll find some of the most admirable applications, but also, like we've gone through multiple times, all the applications that are over on Android, the top 50 on the top chart is 95% web portals to clients. Like we're talking about TikTok and Instagram. Those are essentially like they do not work with the internet. Apparently, Snapchat does, kind of. Not the chatting features, but the filters and the games, which are not that good of games. When we look at the specs that you have on your phone, right? What we have here now is a phone that is more powerful than most laptops from 12 gigabytes of RAM. Of course, you can't really compare the chips with whatever chip it was unless we go up against it. But yes, the chips are more powerful, power efficient too. Of course, better. Well, a better screen than the laptops that came before it. And yet, we hear all about this desktop software that you cannot find. And also for the games on Android are abysmal. Either terrible quality graphics, loaded with ads. Of course, you can find some, but you have to kind of like go in search, go use Reddit and things like of that nature instead of using Google's own search, Google's own Play Store in there too. We've gone through this multiple times. About 95% of the applications. This isn't hyperbole. I think it's like 45 out of 50, which I think is 95%. 90%, 45 out of 50, might have been 47 too. You can go back and check podcast stream when we were counting all the applicants. Applications do need web access, and for the games, I mean, when you look at the sponsored suggestions at the top chart, you have that game that they show on YouTube that's just the people running and doing things running around. So what we essentially have here is an overpriced, not overpriced, but overpowered device with things that are just for scrolling of nature and you're not really doing anything productive. When I look over to the computer side of things as well, you can't even find good computer software that's offline. That's why you have to go back in time, and I mean literally back in time, by going up and going to Google Books or something, or the Internet Archive if it's up, and going back to the 90s and reading all the computer magazines that they had out there, because of course internet speeds weren't going to be good enough to run full-scale applications, which doesn't really make sense why all these people need to have like Windows and Mac computers if they're just going to run web applications when you can honestly, and this should come up, this should be coming to more phones, but it should come to more phones, including iPhones. Just have plugins that you plug in a desktop mode if you're just going to use the web. If you're just going to use the web, applications and clients and things of that nature. Like Canva is one of the biggest apps in the Play Store. Like I'm just going to go here and go top charts, and to scroll down in top charts for applications. I'm going to scroll, and the number 14 application is Walmart. Like most of these applications are just either streaming applications or social media applications, and that's it. Also, like the number 53 application is a QR code and barcode scan, of which, of course, you do not need a QR code and barcode scan on your phone. At worst, at best, it's taking up space that you don't need. And at worst, it's a spyware application. Just use Google Lens. So make sure you guys use Google Lens. All right, let's get into this video. I think you guys are going to see what I'm talking about. So Mr. Stabas went through almost every iPad ever, and then we'll talk about some movies that may disrupt, SSA LTW hierarchy. Maybe, probably not, because I'm always right. Speaking of always being right, just kidding.